the banker do the work for you. Don't get involved.
Okay. Well, I just talked to him. He said he's going to talk to his lender.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can include her, but they're going to go ahead and try.
Right. Exactly. And what if you find out that he can't buy anything for another year because he bought the truck?
That's what I'm
It would be good to know that before you spend a lot of time talking to him.
He literally just bought the truck about 15 days ago.
Because you're very valuable prospecting.
Yeah.
Talking to him about whether or not he's qualified without knowing what the bank actually thinks could be, loss of time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So just let the bank do the job. That's what they're paid for.
Okay.
They are highly motivated. Those bankers are based on commission just like us. Right? So they're motivated to sell a mortgage. As soon as you connect them and let them know you got a hot buyer who's interested in getting a new pre-qualification note, they're eager to please. Bankers come to the door here all the time wanting to talk to realtors like you.
Mm-hmm.
They want to take you out to lunch so they can sell you, into referring all the buyers to them.
Oh,
so, I mean, you could even, in some cases, call another banker and say, could you call Johnny and make sure that he's qualified?
Yeah.
Could you get him a second pre-qualification note? And then you tell your buyer, hey, it looks good to have more than one. When we make an offer on a Saturday at nighttime and there's another offer, everything else being equal, you want to win, don't you? You want to win. So it's better if you have two notes, right? And he says, well...
Oh, 2 pre-approvals?
Sure, why not?
I didn't know you could have 2 pre-approvals.
Absolutely. You can get 10. You can go to banks up and down the street and get one from each bank.
That makes a lot of sense. I didn't even...
And when the buyer makes the offer on the house, actually, they can then change their financing.
So if his lender is telling him, no, we can't include her income, and another
go to another lender. Get another estimate.
It's
a free market. It's fantastic.
A friend of his, so I haven't really stepped on that territory.
Right.
That's a smart
you should start talking to that friend. You want to be involved in the financing, right? Just take liberty. Don't even ask them.
I think I've been fearful of the liabilities speaking about financing in general, so I tend not to touch it.
Yeah, just call the lender and let them touch it,
okay.
Right? All you got to do, call the lender.
That's a good idea.
Talk to the lender. You should know for every buyer you have who that lender is and at least have a conversation with that person.
With the lender.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to get to a closing and find out that there's a problem. You like a car or a truck bought that you didn't know about. That happens all the time with agents. So you want to stay in close communication with the lender, and you want to immediately, once you get an offer accepted, send a copy of that offer to the lender to make sure they have it right away so the mortgage can start being processed. Don't rely on your buyer to do that, right? You know that, right?
Okay.
Good. So be in communication with the lender. Let the lender do all the financing.
Okay.
The lender should be able to give you a new pre-qualification note. And when a buyer says, hey, I just want to show the house, I don't want to talk to the lender, you have to explain to the buyer that you need that note right away.
Well,
if it's a Saturday night, right, it's Saturday night, we can't wait till Monday or Sunday to get a note, right? If another buyer's making an offer, you could lose the house. I've seen too many people in tears because they weren't prepared. My job is to make sure you're prepared. So I need a copy of that note on file before I show you anything.
And I worry a little bit about stuff with lending and with purchases. And so we had a house right next door to me, and my neighbor and I were talking because I had someone come look at the house.
Yeah.
And they had, I don't know what a helix is, but he said that the buyer, the first contract, the buyer had a helix on his credit and that he was trying to purchase a home before it hit.
Yeah.
And he got all the way through the contract, and like 2 or 3 days before the contract closed, that hit his credit. His lender ran it again, and it closed everything out because everything was fraudulent on the lender end.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know anything about that.
Right. So you just make sure you're dealing with a good lender.
Yeah.
Right. You can't.
That's my worry, is because this is his friend.
Right.
It's not like
well, then talk to the friend. Try to insulate the worry.
Okay.
By talking to the friend. Right.
Okay.
The more unknowns there are, the more problems there could be.
Yeah.
You need to trust. But verify.
Yeah.
Right? Call the lender and verify. Easy as that.
Trust but verify. I like that.
Those
buyers are liars always.
Ronald Reagan said that to me. Trust but verify.
That. Okay.
So that's all you got to do. Call the lender, right? You don't have to ask the buyer to call the lender. You're working for this buyer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Call the lender.
Okay.
He's part of the team.
Okay.
So you're part of the team. I need a new pre-qualification note, right?
Okay.
And if the lender's not available or you've perceived the lender's not the right one for him, you could suggest, why don't you get an estimate from this lender who we actually recommend? We work with this person.
That's a good
right?
idea.
The lender he's working with could be part-time, might not know what he's doing, might give you a pre-qualification note that's no good.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So Bill and I have been working with lenders for years. We can give you the best of the best.
Okay.
Right? And you can refer them to call him, right? You don't even have to tell him. You can just say, call William at a different bank and say, could you call my buyer and just see if, you can sell him into using your company instead and give your buyer more options. That's our job, is to give the buyer options, right? Not to figure out all the financing and interest rates and monthly payments and all that stuff. The lender does that.
So do you have a relationship with one or more lenders they're your go-to lenders?
I use whichever one the buyer wants to use.
What if the buyer doesn't have?
Well, then I'll recommend a couple of names.
That you are
that I like,
familiar with? Okay.
That I prefer. Because they're lenders that I can communicate well with and they get the job done, right? Lenders are like real estate agents.
Right.
Some are good, some are bad,
See, and I worked with John Jeffries here, and then the last 2 houses that I did, her lender was from out of state, so I had very minimal contact.
Yeah.
Because her family, she has a broker in the family in another state, and then they have a lender, and that's who they used. So it was really weird. But
Well, the simple key is don't complicate it.
Mm-hmm.
Just get the pre-qualification going and show the houses. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
If they want to talk about financing, you can say, that's my specialty. You can tell them what your specialty is first before you tell them what you don't do. My specialty is helping you find the best house at the best price and helping you to get into a perfect house. But the financing, I recommend this person. Or, I'll call, is it okay if I call your lender for you and just ask them the questions for you, right? If you want to do it that way, you can do that. But generally, let the buyer do the financing part of it because the money is a big deal.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that that's done right.
Right.
And we don't want to also water our skill and our service of helping them find the best house down, too.
Yeah.
You want to stay focused on that. Don't let them distract you. You got to stay focused.
Okay.
Buyers and people have all sorts of distractions. They want to talk about how their sister died last week and how this happened and that happened. And you've got to be good enough to bring it back on track and say, okay, so we're looking at this house tonight. Is your wife serious about this? Are you both going to be there? Are you ready to make an offer if this is the right house for you? And get right back on track. Don't get distracted, right? So that you can focus and get back to prospecting, doing more deals, okay? So I'm going to just talk about a few different issues that come up, okay, with being a real estate agent. I think you're going to be a really good real estate agent. But here's some issues just to be aware of. What could happen? Right? And this happens to a lot of real estate agents that go out of business. 8 out of 10, they say, go out of business within the first 2 years. You've heard that, right? So the first issue is a lack of common sense we have, right? Is it realistic for you to think that you can achieve 50 transactions a year, or 30 or 10, even 10, without doing any type of lead generation, right? Some people think they can. Oh, it's just a real estate agent, people are going to come to me, right? This is called the extreme optimism I talked about, right? Or without any type of lead generation or as little as you would like to do. Is it realistic to think you're going to do 20 transactions a year? Probably not, right? So that's a question, a coach might ask, to somebody who says they don't want to do the conversations, talk to the people, right? A lack of common sense is one of the most common issues because basically, people who have very little sales experience to start, they just don't have the business experience, which leads to a lack of common sense. And you'll get that over time. You'll get more common sense by having more business experience, okay? So that's the first issue. It's just the lack of common sense, knowing that you have to make a certain number of contacts and have a certain number of conversations to actually make those transactions happen. That's where it all starts, okay? Second issue in becoming a great real estate agent, small thinking, right? This is an issue, a problem, right? We don't see the big picture in most cases, right? This is a problem. We're trying to just do enough to get by week to week and month, right? Many people suffer from small thinking and complacency right? And complacency is when we are satisfied with the status quo, right? We have just enough money to pay our bills. Things are just okay. Our car just happens to still be working the way we want it. And we're satisfied with the status quo, right? Even though we're not really satisfied with what we have, right? That's a problem, right? We can be satisfied with the status quo, but not be really satisfied with what we have. But being satisfied with the status quo stops us from doing more, right? And keep pumping, keep going, right? The third issue is a lack of confidence, okay? Just a general lack of confidence. Maybe we don't know the business or, right, it's keeping you from progressing the way you would like, right? So we have to work on skills to develop confidence to make the calls that we need to make. It's a lack of confidence oftentimes, right? That's a major issue in becoming a better real estate agent, is lack of confidence. And the best way I know is to overcome that, right? Some people it's going to be a lot harder. It's like telling a squirrel to swim like a duck. You know what I mean? It's going to be harder for them. But if you're already a duck, it's going to be a little easier for you. If you already have a natural bent on a sales personality, you're a good talker, for example, then you might have the problem of talking too much about yourself. And you got to curb that. When somebody says, I went to the Broncos game last week, and then you immediately see, well, I went to the Jets game. That's talking too much about yourself. You ask them more about themselves, right? So the issue is there's a lack of confidence, but we can get over that. That takes time and practice. And another issue is being an independent contractor, right? We are independent contractors as real estate agents, right? So, I mean, do we actually believe that having the ability to do whatever we want is advantageous to building a business, right? Since most of the time, we're not doing what it takes to succeed. That's a problem, being an independent contractor, not doing what it takes. Most of the clients, most of the people, if you had a real job, really, you would be working. Somebody would be over you telling you what to do. But when you don't have a real job, you can do whatever you want. You can wake up whenever you want. You can make the calls whenever you want, and it becomes a problem, right? But if you have to take orders, generally people do better. That's why many people can't be real estate agents. As part of it is because they're an independent contractor, right? And they have to produce a certain level of activity and go home at a certain time, right? And when we say we have to track our calls and put them on a graph chart, and we have to make a certain number of appointments, if you're working for an employer, and you had to do that or you get fired, you'd probably do it. But, without that motivation, it can be hard, okay? So that's another issue, is the fact that we're independent contractors, okay? Now, another issue, right? Issue number 5 is we are intimidated by tracking our numbers. Agents are intimidated by tracking their numbers. That's hard to do. Most people just prefer to be free. Don't be tracking some numbers and tied down to a sheet of paper, right? But the biggest problem is that we just don't do enough, and therefore we have very little to write down, so we sort of feel guilty tracking our numbers. And but you see, if you write your numbers down, even though they may be smaller than you would like to be, you'll begin to see a pattern as to why you are not being productive, right? So it's funny, we don't write our numbers down because we don't like the numbers. We're not really being productive. But it's not until we start writing our numbers down and tracking them that we can see why we're not being productive, right? Like, for example, if you want to get on the scale every night, you can think about what you ate during the day and think why the scale's not changing. Same thing with the numbers. We have to see the numbers in order to see why things aren't changing, right? Okay, another issue, common issue in real estate growth is the fear of rejection. The fear of rejection. People have that all the time. Or there could be the fear of success. Some people have the fear of success. What if I have too much? What if I'm too busy? What if I don't know what to do, right? There's a fear of success, a fear of how am I going to handle the problems that come up when I'm more successful, right? They say the more you have, the more problems you got to solve. That's a natural part of business. And I've learned that, when we have problems, that's a blessing. That's what we're here for, to solve problems, right? So we have to look at each problem as a good thing and avoid the fear of rejection, right? So we begin building a business, right? But the fear of rejection, or the fear that if we can succeed, that it's going to be a challenge, right? The only way we can overcome the fear of failure and rejection is to go out and experience as much of it as you possibly can, right? So as much as you possibly can, right? So for example, if we put you in a situation, for example, where you had to experience extreme rejection, worse than anything you could ever experience in real estate, right? You could come back to real estate and say, this is easy, because you've experienced extreme rejection in your life. And then everything else is easy from there. So experiencing rejection actually strengthens your tolerance for it, even though it's hard to do. Does that make sense? So it's just like a muscle. You work out more, you build that muscle, right? Now, if you failed day in and day out for 10 to 15 days, would you get used to it and accept it as part of the sales process, right? If you have a great week or a great month, as difficult as it may be for you to experience that, do you think experiencing 5 or 6 months in a row, right, you could develop the habit of a taste for this level of success, right? So you're going to experience some rejection, but you're going to also develop a taste for success in this process. Fear of rejection is something that we just have to get over by actually doing it. It's hard, but that's the challenge, okay? Number 7, the issue is that we don't have the discipline to do the tasks that we don't like to do, right? This business is filled with failures because we don't have the discipline to do what we don't like to do, right? That's the key to success, right? There's all this teaching, you can do everything you like to do, follow your passions. That's a bunch of baloney. I mean, you can get into something you're good at, and you can swim like a duck because you're a duck, but there's still going to be hard times. There's still going to be times you have to do things you don't like to do. You're going to have to swim upstream, and you have to just accept that as part of this job. as part of any job, right? I mean, you don't want to work for the boss to tell you what to do. You got to learn to discipline yourself to do what you don't like to do. Earl Nightingale stated that the common denominator among all successful people was learning to do the things you don't like to do, right? Right? I mean, which part of what we are working on, do you dislike? Once we know that, we could focus on that thing and get you to a higher level of productivity, right? Because you're naturally going to avoid those things you don't like, right? And as a coach for you both, I have to watch carefully for what you're avoiding so I can take corrective action, right? If I say, put it on this graph chart, and you say, well, I can't do that because of this or that, I have to take a look at that to see how I can hold you accountable and hold you in corrective action to do what you're avoiding, because nobody's going to do that for you. You're not going to do it for yourself in some cases. It's helpful to have somebody like that around you, right? Now, here's another issue. We think in a negative fashion, right, and we don't know that we do it. We think in a negative fashion, and we don't know that we do it, right? These thoughts are just pouring through our head all the time, right? Have you ever carefully listened to yourself as to what you are saying? What you are saying is nothing more than a reflection of what's going on in your mind, right? Do you realize that most of what you are saying comes from a point of negativity, which will never enhance your productivity, right? When you identify how negative a person is, how negative you are, you have to basically look at your behavior and see what you're hearing and what you're seeing. And you have to become cognizant about that behavior and do something about it, right? There's the teaching, and I believe it's very accurate. The thoughts, what we think is what we become. We have to think positive about things. And that's a great salesperson, is being positive and maintaining that enthusiasm, right? Here's another issue. We don't have time to build our business before we run out of money. That's a challenge, right? To build a business before we run out of money, right? What areas in your personal and business life can you sacrifice today so you can invest time and money into the business, into this real estate business, right? What areas can you sacrifice to build your real estate business? You have to look at that, because if you're doing something else that's taking away from your business. What can you sacrifice? I've talked to some people, they say, well, this is my passion or that's my passion, but they want to do real estate. And I know they got to sacrifice that hobby or whatever it is to make time to build their business, right? We need to understand that sacrifices are required to do something at a high level, just the way it is. Sacrifices are required to do something at a high level, right? Right? We need to understand the sacrifices and changes that need to be made in order to move forward and to improve. Does that make sense? So these are very common issues in the real estate industry, right? Number 10, the issue is that we don't understand that blind faith is required. Blind faith, right? If you go to the doctor's office, you're going to have to go through some type of surgery, right? And say, for example, you're going to have to go through a surgery, right? Don't you have blind faith that the doctor will solve the problem, right? And help you become healthy again, right? You got to have faith there, right? If you have a legal problem, don't you exercise blind faith that the attorney is going to do whatever it takes to solve the problem for you? Well, you probably wouldn't hire that person if you didn't have faith, right? You just say, no, doctor, you're not cutting me open, right? But if you have the faith that they're going to solve the problem, you're going to do it, right? Right? Do you honestly believe that, being here is going to, and if I ask you to do something, right, is going to hurt your business now or in the future, right? You have to approach, right, this with the idea that you need to move forward. You need to move forward, and you have faith that the actions that you're hearing, the actions that you're learning, the language you're learning is going to work. Otherwise, you're not going to be prepared, right? You have to have faith to acquire the tools, to know that you're going to encounter the situation, right? So there was somebody that said once, luck is a combination, really, of work, the work you put in, right? Preparation and opportunity, right? You can't seize opportunity if you're not prepared, right? So the goal here is to get you prepared so that you can take the opportunity when it comes up. When somebody says, why should I list with you? You're going to know what to say. The words are going to roll off your tongue, right? But faith, having the faith and having that blind faith to move forward with learning these things, knowing that the opportunity is going to arrive is key in this process. Okay. Another issue. The agents fight using the scripts. They fight it. They say, I'm going to make up my own script. I'm going to come up with these things. I'm going to modify the script. I'm not going to learn word for word paragraphs. They just fight it. They fight it because they're not comfortable with the scripts. It's not a comfortable process. That's why they fight it, right? They're not used to them, or they don't see the value in the scripts, right? Not comfortable, not used to, don't see the value. Very common, right? My job is to help you understand all of this, right? And in many cases, I want to help you to find a role play partner, so you can, through repetitious involvement, become comfortable using the scripts. Repetition involvement. You can do a role play partner, and that's great. But the biggest one is doing it in front of the people, right? Practicing, right? When you went to that for sale by owner the other day, right? Maybe you had the opportunity to say, if you felt that you could get most money, the quickest sale, and the fewest problems by having me represent you to sell your home, would you do so? Actually practicing it and using the scripts, right? So don't fight using the scripts, right? I have to assume that, right, when you go to a listing presentation, you say the same thing to sellers, right? And so if you're only getting a small percent of sellers, say 40% of sellers to sign a contract, you can see that most of the scripts you are using are not working, right? Are they, right? Would it be worth your time, worth your while to change your scripts to get you 70% listings taken, right? Versus the 40% which you may be taking today, right? Okay, so that's another issue, fighting the fact that using scripts works. It helps us. Having random selection of memorized language, right? Not just going off on a whole paragraph, using it randomly, being ready for them to ask questions in between, going back to the script when necessary, right? Number 12, the issue is no previous sales or business experience. That's an issue for people in real estate, right? For some reason, our industry in real estate does attract a number of people that have no sales or business experience whatsoever, right? Now, why real estate is so attractive to somebody who, worked as an engineer or a CPA or who is a construction worker to suddenly think about real estate as an easy business to succeed in? I don't know why that happens, right? The question is, did your previous job teach you the skills required to convince a person, right, to buy or sell a home, right? Did your previous job teach you the skills required to convince a person to buy or sell a home, right? Wouldn't you agree then that although you are successful in your previous job, you have to learn an entire new set of skills, right? Can we start working on them today? Right? It's a new set of skills, right? Again, this is only a sampling of the issues real estate agents face, right? My job as a coach is to continue to identify any issues that you have, right? And again, if we don't have the solution, right, bring the problem to me so we can create one together, right? Remember, it's okay, it's okay to not do something or to have struggles or to second guess whether something will really work or not, right? Right? But, I'll check, I've dealt with a lot of these things before after 15 years in the real estate business, and I'll check on it for you. And a lot of times the things that you're experiencing are going to be the same things I've experienced in my business. There's been times when I've had doubt, fear, and the business has gone downhill. I didn't know why, and I figured out what to do to make this work. And I'm here to help you with that too. But I need to know that you'll allow me to hold you accountable if you want that, right? And so if that means that I have to do a hard thing, right, which is potentially upset you. When I say, can you do this by then? And you tell me the next time I see you haven't done that, why didn't you do it? What are the issues coming up with it? Like a doctor, I have to diagnose why we're not doing what we said we would do. And that's a hard thing for a coach to do, because I'd much rather just be your friend. Like most parents want to just be a friend and they don't want to discipline. But there has to be a level of accountability for us to grow, right? And that's why most people have to have a regular job, because some boss holds them accountable. And the boss comes by, like, oh, boss is coming by, look like you're doing something, and so that's the way, I have to be as your broker to help you achieve, and I'll do that for you. And, if it gets too pressuring, you let me know and I'll lay off, but I'll tell you that having accountability will help you as comfortable as it is. And so I'll sit down with you. I'll say, okay, so here's what we're doing. Here's what I recommend you do. Can you do it? Right? And you say yes. Well, then you expect me to see you again and say, well, you said you'd have me those graph charts by 5 p.m. filled in nice and clean like I asked you. we're going to check on that, right? Because coaching doesn't continue if we don't do what we say we're going to do. Actually, it does, because I want to help you, and I'm not just going to throw you away, but it's going to be frustrating for both of us. We have to get through that together. Any questions about anything so far? Okay. One thing I want to remind you, I've talked to you about this before, is isolating objections. Say you're on an appointment with somebody, and they say, well, I can't buy because the bank said they won't have my mortgage ready because my wife doesn't qualify right now. You're going to isolate that objection and make sure there's nothing else. For example, you would say, aside from this issue with the mortgage and your wife, are there any other reasons you would hesitate to buy the perfect house today if we found you the right house? Right? And then they'll tell you if there's any other objections. Right? Does that make sense? So you want to isolate that objection so that you can then solve that problem, right? The problem is if you don't isolate the objection, you say, okay, oh, it's your wife, it's the bank issue, you solve that problem, and then they say, oh, now I've got another issue that we have to deal with. And you solve that problem, they go to another one, and another one, and another one. So one of the reasons you're isolating is so you can find out, is there a terminal problem that you can't solve? Right? Why would you solve the banking problem if you can't solve the terminal problem that comes later? Right? And, he says, oh, well, my wife this. And then you say, is there any other objections? He said, well, actually, we went bankrupt yesterday. I'm not going to be able to buy for 3 years. That'd be a problem. You're not going to try to solve the first objection. Right? Another example is, if you're in a listing presentation and they say, well, I'm not listing with you because I'm listing with my friend.
That happened to me on that lady that I went to her open house.
Yeah. And that is one of the most common.
I don't think I combated that well.
The most common objection from a client who you might list their home is, well, I've already got somebody else. In fact, when I'm working to persuade people to list with me, I tell them, hey, if any other agent calls, just tell them Dan Novak's taking care of you already. You can even tell my name if you want, and they'll probably go away, right? So homeowners love that one. They use that all the time. So when you come across that issue, for example, you can say, aside from wanting to list with Susie, is there any other reason that you would not list with me? Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. So there, you got number 2 spot, right? So if you don't list with Susie, you would list with me, right? And there's no other reason you wouldn't list with me other than Susie? Okay, great.
Yeah, that's almost exactly how it happened. This lady had an open house and all these agents came, and her cousin or aunt is an agent and was there, and she introduced us and said, this is who I'm listing with if I list. I'm for sale by owner. Mm-hmm. And then I smiled and said, well, if anything ever doesn't work out and either of you need my support, my name's Erin. I gave him a card.
So she had her agent there with her already?
Her aunt or whoever.
Her aunt?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we exchanged cards. It was a fun time.
Right. And that's nice. It's a great experience to have because you felt the rejection through that, right? You walked out the door, ooh, that was weird, right? And that's just the way it is. But they say, here's a strategy you can use, right? First is isolate. So you know any other objections, you know what you're going to have to handle. You got a bucket list of what you got to deal with, right? But we can talk about that specific objections later. I'm working with somebody else, right? But another strategy is when you know you're not going to get the listing, right? Use that opportunity to experience more failure. Because we know experiencing failure and discomfort leads to growth in this real estate industry, as hard as it may seem, as backwards as it may sound, right? So when they say, I got my sister here, right? Look back at the homeowner and say, if you felt I could get you more money than your sister for the house, or your aunt or whoever it is, would you consider listing with me? Mm-hmm. What do you think she's going to say? Probably no. I'm listing with my sister. How dare you ask me that in front of her?
I tried not to say much because we shook hands. But it's very nice to meet you.
Right? So practice a little discomfort, right? And sometimes you're going to feel like a jerk a little bit. Well, you could look at the sister and say, how many homes have you sold in this area in the past 6 months? Does your sister have any? I mean, it's a little awkward because the aunt is there, right? Does your aunt have any other way she earns money that could make her busy, right?
Right.
I mean, these are what you're looking for. Normally doctors don't operate on anybody in their immediate family. You could look at the aunt and say that because if something goes wrong, somebody's to blame for the rest of their life. My mother always told me that when you hire somebody, you should never hire somebody that you can't fire. Look at them both. Practice your language. Make it weird. Right? When you walk out the door, they're either going to say, wow, she's a jerk, or wow, she's really knows what she's doing. She's very aggressive. And a smart seller and a smart buyer wants an aggressive agent because they know you're going to be persuasive on their side. You're persuading people to do what they want. good real estate agent is highly persuasive and highly persistent. And you can prove that and practice that on appointments where you know you're not going to get anything. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I encourage you, don't be afraid. This is your job. You signed up for this, right? But again, I do know that, a fantastic real estate agent is like a duck. They're naturally bent and built that way, right? And if you're not a duck and you're a squirrel and we're trying to teach you to prospect and be a great salesperson, it's going to be harder and you're going to have more resistance. And the only thing that's going to get you there is some extreme motivation, like the threat of death if you don't do it, or some huge debt or something like that, or some spiritual divinity that says you got to do it, right? But it's easier for some than others. And if you're a squirrel and you're trying to be a duck, it's always going to be hard, and that's just the way it is. And real estate is not the best business for some people. But
is that like on the DISC assessment where the B's and the I's tend to be pretty high in real estate, and the SCs are more difficult?
It can be. I wonder. Yeah. There's, if we looked at statistics, which personality type is the most likely to be a listing agent, I would assume it's going to be a DI, somebody who's dominant and can take control, and also is an I, which, likes to talk. But there's exceptions. There's people that have adapted who are a C-type accountant personality, who know the language and are very detailed and can adapt to each customer. That is key. Being able to identify which type of customer you're dealing with, right? If you're an I, you're naturally going to be talking to I's in the way you talk as an I, right? And if you're talking to a D, they're not going to want to hear all that stuff. They're going to want to hear the facts, right? Or you're talking to a C personality, you got to know they're a C personality. You might see on their walls that they're an accountant or something, and you start talking details with them. Mm-hmm. So this is how this is going to work. You're going to get this at 11:59 a.m. We have your email address, and we have these details worked out, and you have to learn to identify and adapt as a good salesperson. But for a good salesperson to adapt to being a good real estate agent, it's basically you have to be a chameleon in many ways to adjust and talk to people the way they normally communicate so that there's not miscommunications. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Any questions about anything? Okay. Keep in mind that, you win with slight edges sometimes. When a race is driven, person could be just a bumper ahead of another car and win first prize. Isn't that right? When a race is ran, same applies to real estate. You just have to be a little better in some cases to win the listing, right? You just have to be up a little earlier to make the calls. Slight edges make a big difference in your life, right? Maybe it's that extra glass of water I drink that helps me think better so I can make more calls and feel better, right? Public awareness is important in the real estate business, people knowing who you are. You could buy little primetime logos. Maybe I'll buy them. We can iron them on our shirts. And when you walk around, you wear a little logo. Public awareness. People know who you are. It's not a great way to get business. Maybe it'll get you a listing a year, 2 listings a year. But people will also perceive you as someone who is invested in their business, right? Not a secret agent. Public awareness is very valuable, right? So if you get a shirt that says realtor on it everywhere, to make all your shirts, why not? Make all your shirts have it on there, right? I like to be positive with people. And a term you might want to integrate into your speeches, of course. Of course implies that it is part of our course that we're going to do something, right? If somebody says, will you call me back later? Of course I'll do that for you, right? It's a nice positive term to use, right? You got absolutely, fantastic. There's a lot of things you can use, but we want to fill our language toolbox with positive, encouraging things that show people that we are actively working in a positive way for them, and we're getting things done. We're proactive. Of course is a proactive thing to say. Of course. Okay? Absolutely. You bet. Things like that are things we want to add to our language because people need to be positive. They need to be built up on a regular basis. I have a buyer I'm working with right now to sell the house, and he's calling me once in a while. He's got all these, is it going to be okay? What's happening with the financing? They're supposed to get the house painted. He's wringing his hands wondering if the thing is going to go through. And my job is to keep him on track and saying, homeownership is going to be a great thing for you. Of course, everything's working out. Do you believe that it's going to work out? That's important to believe, right? Otherwise, we could sabotage ourselves if we don't choose to believe in something. And so we are the bearers of good news, right? When somebody says, hey, I bought that truck. I don't know if it's going to work out. I'm sure everything's going to be okay. Just call this here banker, Everything's going to be okay. You're not saying it's going to work out is the way he thinks it is, but it's going to be okay in the end. You know, somebody once told me that everything is going to be okay. And in the end, he said, everything's going to be okay in the end. Very wise man. And he said, if it isn't okay, the end hasn't happened yet.